So we will bring the financial affairs meeting order. I'll start with a roll call, starting with Mr. Epps.
Zachary Epps, present. Ross Whiting, present.
Mia Blitstein, present.
Pamela Henry, present.
Leah Mulhern, present.
Jennifer Lemon, present.
Robin Murphy, present.
Charles Cordell Williams, present.
Okay. So first line of business, approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you. We didn't just do this
I
20 minutes.
will turn it over to Mr. Sweigard.
Thank you, Pam. Looking at the agenda tonight, we are going to look at the interim financial statements through the end of September, including the balance sheet and the statement of changes in fund balance. We are also going to have discussion about the upcoming issuance of debt for the Glenside and Cedarbrook projects, and we have a couple guests tonight to speak about that. We're also going to take a look at the Act 1 index as part of the 2026-2027 budget approval process and Act 1 timeline, which has kicked off officially on September 30th and begins again. And board action items and debt issuance are the same topic tonight. The agenda is a little out of order. I'm going to start off with the debt issuance. So Dan and Ben, I believe, is online. Benjamin Kapenstein from PFM, who is our financial advisor, so that they can speak and they can get out of here as soon as possible.
Yep. Hey, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, you got it up on the screen there. Cool. All right.
Oh, yeah.
So, there we go. Appreciate you having me tonight. So there might be a couple other gentlemen joining, Brad, my colleague, and Dan as well. I'm not sure if they're on yet, but we'll just get started. If anybody has questions, feel free to jump in and stop me. I want to make sure I get all your questions answered. As Josh said, we're here to talk about the financing plan for two of those projects that you guys all just discussed, Glenside and Cedarbrook. So if you go to the next page, we kind of laid out a topics of discussion to go over the highlights for tonight. So if you total those two projects, you come up with about $30 million. So that's kind of the financing plan that's being laid out. I believe the other projects discussed are being paid for in cash and or grants, it sounds like. So we're kind of focused on these two projects that total $30 million. In order to phase in the debt service and not hit you all at once, borrow $30 million and the interest hits on day one, the plan is to phase it into two steps. So one of the borrowings would happen late this year, and then another one would happen in 2026 once you know a little bit more about the final cost of the project. The plan would be for the first issuance this year to be what's called bank qualified. And if anybody was here with previous issuances, Cheltenham has taken advantage of that many times. So what that means is if you issue under $10 million of municipal debt in one calendar year, you get slightly lower interest rates and a shorter call feature than you would if you go above $10 million. So it's some extra incentives to stay under that limit. So our plan would be to take step one out for about $10 million, give you some seed money to fund those engineering and architectural costs and other things as they start coming through, and then finish it up with a bigger borrowing next year. And we'll take a look at those numbers specifically in a couple slides here. We did set them up as 25-year level amortization schedules. And again, that'll be illustrated here in a minute. The timeline that we're currently following. So we're here tonight going over the plan. Then the next event would be at the October 14th school board meeting. The board would consider a maximum parameters resolution, which we'll talk about what that means here in a second. After that, in mid-November or a little bit later, a bond sale, which is when you would lock in the rates. And then December is when you would close and you'd receive those funds and be able to start spending the money on the projects. So what's a maximum parameters resolution? Again, if you've been here for a previous borrowing, you've probably heard this term before. It's basically the common way that school districts and municipalities across Pennsylvania borrow money. In the old days, it used to be that you would have to time a bond sale with a board meeting date. So we would have to look at your upcoming dates and say, we're going to time this to price November 15th or whatever it is. No matter what happens on November 15th, if that's a bad day in the market, you kind of still have to price or you have to wait another month. These days, we have what's called a maximum parameters resolution, which sets forth the maximum parameters that you can issue and then lets us time the market a little bit more on a good day, and we don't need to line it up with a board meeting date. So typically what this means is the numbers are going to be much higher than you're actually going to borrow for. But what happens is at the end, whatever you don't end up borrowing gets written off by bond counsel. And that's just to create flexibility for us to achieve the best rates in the market when we price. So the numbers that you'll see are much higher than you would actually be borrowing. Again, this is the same process that you've used before. And importantly, we are adding in, it's not just the $30 million for these two projects, but you also have a series of 2019 bonds that can potentially be refinanced in the future. So we're throwing those in as well to give us flexibility that if that does make economic sense, it can save you money, that we can take advantage of it. It doesn't currently, but this is just to provide that flexibility in the future. So if you scroll down to number 5 there, you do have a bunch of different bonds that are currently callable, meaning that they can be refinanced if the market makes sense. Currently, it doesn't make sense to refinance any of your debt, which is why we haven't brought it up to you yet. But we do monitor that on a daily basis. And if it comes up that they do start producing meaningful savings, we'll definitely let you know, and we'll be able to act on that with this new flexibility in the parameters. Any questions so far? Okay. So just giving an interest rate update here. So if you scroll down a little bit, we'll skip that first graph. But if you look at that middle graph there, so this is the 10-year BVAL rate. You can think of it like the 10-year tax-exempt treasury rate. This graph at the top here is from 1993. So you can see starting on the left in 1993, rates were higher than they are now if you go over to the right. So historically, we're still in a lower interest rate environment than we have been in the past. However, we're certainly not in the lowest interest rate environment, which you can see there was in 2020, 2021. During COVID and other things that were going on, the market really went low. We've definitely crept up since then, but still historically in a good spot. If you scroll down to that bottom graph, so this one is from January of 2024 to present, so a little bit shorter term. And you can see we've kind of trended upwards, but then came back down in April of 25. Interestingly, we've been getting the question about Fed interest rates and the Fed cutting rates. The Fed cut rates, I believe it was September 17th. And if you look at the bottom right there, you can see that the September 17th, after that, there was a quick tick up in rates. So the Fed lowered interest rates and the long-term 10-year rate went up. So it just shows that there's not a direct correlation between Fed interest rate cuts and the rates that you're borrowing at. It can have some effect, but it can also make rates go up. So it's a hard thing to do to time the market. And it's more important to just borrow when you actually need the money. Next slide, please. So this is a slide of your outstanding debt today, nothing new. This is the way it currently sits. The top part here is your debt service. So that's principal and interest, and it has each of your series of bonds. And then if you look over on the far right, it has your total debt service there. So you can see your total debt service is about 10.6 million down to about 10.5, and it goes out till 2041. If you scroll down a little bit, the bottom is the same exact thing, except it now takes into account some state aid that you receive on some of these bonds. So the numbers all look a little bit less. And if you go over to column 32, the bold there, you can see your level at about $10 million local effort. So that's with the state aid included. If there's some highlights there in the call date section at the bottom, those are all the bonds that are currently callable, the ones I was discussing earlier that could be refinanced if it made sense. Again, it doesn't currently, but that's the ones we're monitoring for the future. Next slide, please. Okay, so getting to the actual borrowing plan. So again, it's a two-step plan. Step 1 in the blue there, the timing is December 1st, 2025 is when it would settle. It is bank qualified, 25-year level structure, and it'll fund $9.75 million of projects. If you scroll down a little bit, if you look at column 5, so that's your existing local effort, what we just looked at total. Column 6 is the new local effort from this borrowing. And then column 7 is just those two added together. So after step 1, you go from about $10 million to $10.7 million. And then step 2, if you go to that, that'll happen later in 2026 or whenever the project needs the funds. That could move around a little bit depending on how your project draws go. That would be a non-bank qualified transaction because we need it to be above 10 million. So it's about 20.25 million. But again, it's a 25-year level transaction. So if you go down to column 8, you can see the new debt service for that. And then column 9 just adds that in, and that would be your ending new local effort. So you go from about $10 million to 12.2. But importantly, if you look in 2026 to 2027, you go up by about $1 million, and then the next year about 700, and then another 500. So you get to kind of work your way in as opposed to it hitting all at once. Any questions on the borrowing plan? Okay. So I think if you go to the next slide, this is just the parameter schedule, I believe. Yes. So this is the parameter schedule. It's a total of $50 million. So again, it's a lot more than $30 million. And there's some sticker shock to that number, but it does include the 2019 refunding. So this has the flexibility to issue both of those steps, refinance the 2019 bonds, and then whatever is not used will just get written off at the end of the process. Now, the 2019 bonds will probably keep that open until the potential refinancing opportunity presents itself. But anything that's not used from the new money will just be written off by bond counsel at the end. So again, this is the parameter schedule. This is what will be in front of you next week on the 14th. Bond counsel, I believe, will be there with the parameters resolution, which I believe is being developed now. And it'll lay out all the intricacies of the borrowing, but it will include this schedule you're seeing right here. Any questions on that?
Okay,
Just.
the maximum parameter schedule, that's for both issuances?
Yes, good question.
Okay.
Yep, both issuances and that refinancing. So all three of those together, correct. And yeah, that's the borrowing plan. So happy to answer any further questions. Like I said, the next action item would occur at your meeting on the 14th, where there would be a formal resolution in place that's currently being advertised, I think tomorrow maybe, and will be there available for vote on the 14th. And again, I think either bond counsel or somebody will be there to answer any specific questions you have on the actual resolution.
I will post this presentation on board docs for everyone.
Any questions from?
I think we're all good then, Ben.
Cool. Thanks for having me, guys.
You're very thorough, Ben.
Good. That's what I like to hear. Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Did you have anything? Before you go?
Answer questions if you have any, but Ben did a fine job.
Yeah, this group is never without questions. So.
Yeah. It's similar to what we did in 2022, the parameters.
Right.
That's basically how almost every single bond issue now in Pennsylvania, and it's consistent with what you've done in the past. Oh, pretty normal.
Just terminology, I'll be happy to look at this later, but the new local effort, is that like the year-to-year change? That column, what is that actually?
Sure. So that's based on, you have existing bonds that are still eligible for PlanCon reimbursement from the Commonwealth. So Josh, It's the debt profile page, Josh, that has the outstanding debt. That indicates this. Yes. So on the top right there, you can see it's about, you can see it there well.
10.6.
Yes. So that is what you're paying to bondholders,
Right.
right? And the bottom just reflects that every year you're receiving reimbursement from the state to the tune of, roughly $500,000.
Right.
And that's based on grandfathered older bond issues, because the plan program isn't up and running.
So then that's connected. So if we scroll down, because I think the one you went to first was one on that. The new annual local effort.
Oh,
Yeah.
these are based on estimated current interest rates.
Yeah.
The next bond issue this year, 10 million. 2026 bond issue of roughly 20 million.
It's like year to year change.
And yes, so.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yep, and then those are added on top of the local.
It's year to year. Okay.
Yep,
Awesome.
that's right.
Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you. Any other questions? I'll answer whatever you like.
Just to clarify, make sure I understand, in the maximum parameters resolution, both of the different bond issuances from there, and then the 2019 refinancing, that's only if conditions are favorable to do it, or right?
Correct, yeah.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. That's right.
But having it in there gives the flexibility to kind of jump on it.
Correct. So the 2019 is in this schedule, and they have certain coupon payments targeted for the future. So these payments that are further out carry a higher interest rate and have the potential for refinance.
Josh, I think you might have showed us this before. I'm sure you probably did actually, but kind of what impact will this have on sort of the budget and what our considerations will be for, tax increases if necessary?
Sure. So this $10 million of our net effort translates down to this chart. So according to this financing schedule for the year ended June 30th, 2026, this fiscal year, there's no impact to our bottom line, no impact to the budget. Next year, if we're planning on issuing this $9 million of debt and $20 million of debt as a secondary issuance, then I've got to add an additional $600,000, an additional $300,000, or we have to plan on adding an additional $900,000. So in essence, it's roughly a 1% tax increase to absorb this first year's bond issuance for the June 30th, 2027 school year.
Thank you.
Yeah, so reading into that a little bit, we're looking at, if this were to play out the way we see it, about a 1% tax increase to deal with the additional 900,000 this year, and then the following year, an additional 1.2, 1.3 million dollars to deal with the additional debt, provided all things stay the same.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah.
Until we get up to this 2.2 level.
Yeah, to
Budget.
full issuance. Okay.
Josh, turn it back over to you.
I have no
Yeah,
further
thank you.
questions. And thank you for coming out.
Everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here again. Appreciate it. Have a good evening. Nice.
Donna, did you have any questions?
No. I don't know everything of what I can't see.
All right, so we will flip back and get back on track in the agenda, and we'll talk about the interim financial statements. Here we're looking at the interim financial statements and the balance sheet through September of 2025. And there's a couple things I'm going to point out because obviously with the stadium project, now we have money moving. So if you recall in prior years, the general fund had surpluses. And what we did with those surpluses is we basically wrote an IOU to the cap reserve fund that those surpluses are going to be used to address capital projects and have a long-term impact on our facilities and on the district so that future tax raises would be required to fix said pieces of equipment and to help fund the stadium project. So that payable was right here. This 15 million consists of all of that money that was parked waiting to be paid to the cap reserve fund. Now that the stadium project is undergoing, and we have a few other minor projects undergoing capital wise, we're starting to take that money and physically pay it to the cap reserve fund and the capital projects fund. Hence this $3.7 million reduction in that liability, that payable, and hence this reduction in cash year over year. So this reduction in cash is indicative of year over year we're losing lots of money, we're dropping in cash. It's indicative of we're transferring cash out of the general fund into the cap projects fund to help pay for projects. Looking at our revenue year over year here on the bottom. Oh, I did forget to point out we have this piece of deferred revenue. That was the tax equity state funding that will reverse itself this year. Looking at our total revenue year to date through September, we collected $96 million this year. Last year at this time, we collected $99 million. On the next page, you'll see the impact of the budget freeze and what it's had on cash flow in the district. On the expenditure side, so far we have paid $26.5 million versus last year we paid 26.4, so relatively flat, all things considered year over year. And we anticipate the price of goods increase. We anticipate salaries increase. We expect to see a slight increase in these rates, but when we have a delay in funding, we often pass that delay down to our vendors, so our cash outflows aren't as quick as they've been in the past. So looking at total revenues, we looked at $96 million through the end of September versus $99 million as of last year. The only state source money we received so far was the homestead money, which is a separately approved pot of money that releases itself. So we got our first payment of the homestead money. Everything else, all other subsidy payments have not been released unless they were attributed to the prior year. So you can see that's a $5 million swing in cash flow year over year. Also, the state administers the payments of federal money, so we have not received any federal monies through the beginning of the school year as well, other than a couple of receivables that were due from the prior year.
So Josh, September, the 2026 are projections for this time next year?
This column?
Or is this?
Oh, I'm sorry, this is the year ending 2026, June 30th, 2026. And
So that's fiscal year 26.
correct, fiscal year 26, fiscal year 25. So this isn't a projection, this is September 30th of 25 for the fiscal 2026 school year.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry, that's a tad confusing.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understand that.
So it's the first 3 months compared this year versus last year. So in this first 3 months, there was a $7 million swing in cash collections in only a 3-month period. Looking down the expenditure side, expenditures incurred through September 30th this year, 26.5 million. There's only a couple items of note. That is administrative services. This is where all of our principal salaries are housed. And if you recall, last year we had a bunch of vacancies that were filled later in the school year. So we didn't have vacancies this year. A number of those vacancies were at the high school, and those positions were filled in October, November, and subsequent. So that's the reason for the difference in this category. On the facility side, if you recall last year, we had a significant investment in the mods and getting them up to date and modernized. We did do a lot of work this summer. We found a lot of ways to get things done and save as much money as possible, and we're currently under last year's actual expenditures. The other item to point out is on the employee benefit side. Last year we had a workers' comp audit, and we owed an additional $125,000 in workers' comp insurance fees That did not happen this year, is not expected to happen. So we anticipate a drop in those expenditures year over year. They'll continue to see. Before I move on, any questions on the balance sheet or the fund balance change statement?
I do have a quick question. 2.6 revenue from state sources, does that represent money we're actually receiving right now, or because balance sheet at point in time? So is this money we already had? That represent?
Yes, we received there's 2 homestead payments. We received one.
Well, that's what you're in homestead. Okay, that's what you're talking about.
So that's a whole separately certified
Right.
fund. So that's still paying.
That's what I was thinking. Didn't make any sense.
All right, looking at the trajectory of our structural balance sheet, obviously still intact, and still looking at this trend line, similar to prior years. And more importantly, digging down on some of those local tax items. On the real estate tax side, now that we are through the end of September, we've completed the bulk of our cash flow from our real estate tax collections, as we're now at the first phase period. So we do have an increase of $2.3 million in our local real estate tax collection, which corresponds directly with our increase in our real estate tax rate. On the earned income tax side, we are seeing a 3% increase in earned income tax collections year over year, which makes a lot of sense. It reflects wage growth. Our real estate transfer taxes are surprisingly strong through 3 months this year, which indicates there's still a lot of movement in the housing market. And our delinquent taxes, you saw they were trending downward and now swinging the other direction. I believe there was some settlements and some payouts on the delinquent real estate tax side. And the final column, earnings on investments, as we continue to see that slow drop in the prime rate, then we continue to see our investment return slide to match. But still, year over year, looking at a $30,000 drop, this is still not tremendously far off. So, any questions on local tax collections? All right, so I started off by posting the Act 1 timeline, which was released today. September 30th, every school district across the state gets its Act 1 base index, and that is the max that we are allowed to increase taxes year over year unless we get adjusted base index. So on September 30th, we received our base index of 3.5%, which was very much in line with that independent financial office report we looked at, which had future projections. It was right about 3.5%. So if you recall, in the past, anytime our market value aid ratio exceeds 0.4, and that's our ratio of market value of real estate and personal income versus student that attends a district, anytime that exceeds 4, then we get an adjusted Act 1 index the following year. They released our market value personal income aid ratio. It is just below 4, so 3.5% is our max Act 1 index for this year. Which means there's going to be a whole lot of calculating to get to this point, where we start to consider whether we need to consider any sort of opt-out resolution, or whether we need to consider increasing taxes greater than our Act 1 index. So as we get through November and December's finance meeting, we're going to take a fast-track look at the preliminary budget so that we can make that decision before January. January 29th is when that opt-out resolution has to be adopted, if it's going to be adopted, which means the decision has to be made by the second week of January, pending special meeting. We'll get it done for our January legislative meeting. So November, we can look forward to enrollment update, as our October 1st enrollment is in and will be reported to the state. As you recall, we use that enrollment update to start to develop our per building pupil budget allotments. and our classroom supplies budgets for our buildings. And then that drives, our student count drives all of our other expenditures, our staffing, our supplies, most of the rest of our budget throughout the rest of the budget process. And so one other item to point out, the timing of our May and June meeting means that by April's meeting will be looking to approve a proposed final budget before we go into our May meeting, so that we have the proper approval time for our June, our second week of June legislative work. Any question on the equity index and the budget timeline?
Keep with the trend, right? Obviously, we're gonna have a budget, state budget by April 14th, right? Check in the morning, like check in fantasy sport. Do we have a budget? It seems like that like once you start the calculations, you're gonna have to take into account reality. And then obviously the preliminary budget isn't final. But I guess I'm trying to get a sense in the timeline of when we'll start having to make possibly not final decisions, but looking at numbers that don't include if the state still doesn't have a budget approved. Like, is that giant January timeline, December timeline that we're looking at it, or?
Do you mean current cash flow?
So not current cost. So we've talked about that. Like we're in a good position, strong position. So I'm saying like as you are calculating numbers, can you go back to the timeline? November, December, 2025, right? You're talking with building department allocations, the staff, supplies. We're figuring out our budget, like how much revenue we're going to have, how much we can spend, how much we can actually spend. And so that revenue number all the way up through January 29th is going to include what we don't know is going to come from the state for next year, because we don't essentially. So what I'm trying to get a sense of, when are we going to start plugging numbers in that don't account for the lack of the state budget? I'm
assuming by then we'll have this year's state budget adopted and we'll have a good idea of where we're headed.
Yeah.
That's not just an assumption. I don't know.
Yeah.
Since I've been doing this, I think the latest we ever went was December.
Yeah.
I think it was 2 years ago. So I don't know.
So in that December timeline, you had to create something that had like, oh yeah, we don't know what we're going to get from the state, but here's a budget that we have to create anyway.
Our structural stability was stronger,
Mhm.
and so there was, and the economy was moving in a different direction.
Mhm.
So it didn't seem as pressing to have to make a decision on the opt-out in
Yeah.
December as it does now. Our structural stability is closing. Economic indicators aren't pointing in the right direction necessarily in terms of funding for public education. So now I think we have to face a little more scrutiny with that opt-out decision.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I'm not trying to get at anything for us. It's really like, do we need to be telling like Nelson, we have until December 14th until we have to start making decisions on a budget that we don't know about. Senator Haywood, right? And let, whatever it is, our advocacy move. So I'm really thinking about, is there some sort of red line that, hey, legislators, we ideally, the red line's already passed, right? But like for next year, is there some kind of red, like we can look at, hey, we're actually gonna have to start thinking about our Act 1, but we don't know what revenue. So it's like, I'm trying to think about advocacy.
It's a really good question because, our state revenue is, more than 20% of our entire budget.
Yeah.
And there's, $1 million or $2 million of increases. That's a 1 or 2% tax increase that gets offset by state subsidy. So if we get to that point and we don't have a state budget, let's walk through the line items and let's talk about the assumptions we're going to make. How comfortable with it.
That's fair. Thanks.
Do you have questions?
I'm not a legislator. I mean, you can. These political responses.
I don't know that I have patience for
I don't see any other hands raised. That's the end of our meeting. Any questions in the? I make a motion to adjourn. Meeting is adjourned. He did